There were 50 people in my son's backyard when his wife hit me across the face. I want you to understand the precise geometry of that moment. The striped paper tablecloths, the little grandson's birthday banner sagging in the August heat, the smell of charcoal and frosting and someone's sunscreen, and then the flat crack of Cassie's palm against my left cheekbone. Sharp, deliberate. Not a push or a shove, but an actual slap. The kind you read about in Victorian novels. And the subsequent silence that dropped over those 50 people like a net. I remember the sound of a child somewhere stopping mid-laugh. I remember a plastic cup hitting the patio. I remember the red print of her rings on my face for the next 3 days. And I remember my son Derek standing 6 feet away, holding a paper plate with a hot dog on it, looking at his wife, looking at me, and then very deliberately choosing to look at neither of us. He didn't say a word. That silence was the beginning of everything. But to understand how a woman who spent 32 years building beautiful rooms for other people ends up standing in her son's backyard with a handprint on her face, you need to go back a little further. Back to the house on Fenwick Lane that Paul built, and the coffee mug with the cracked handle, and the 3 years I spent becoming invisible inside my own life. Back to before I understood what was actually happening. Back to when I still thought the problem was me. Paul Holt died in April, 4.5 years before the party. A cardiac event on a Tuesday morning, the doctors said, which is a very clinical way of saying that the man I had shared a bed with for 31 years sat down at his workbench in the garage to fix a hinge on an old cabinet and simply did not get up again. He was 66. He had plans to take me to Portugal in September. He had been meaning to reseal the driveway. He had a half-drunk cup of coffee on the workbench that I couldn't bring myself to wash for 2 weeks. The mug was white, ceramic, with a hairline crack along the handle that he'd repaired himself with a thin bead of epoxy. He said it held heat better than the new ones. He said throwing out a fixable thing was a character flaw. I thought of him every time I picked it up, which was every morning, which was intentional. Paul was a contractor, residential, careful, meticulous. He built things that lasted. He built our house on Fenwick Lane in 1991 with 2 partners and a lot of weekends, and he had it paid off by 2003, and he loved that house, the way some men love boats or dogs, with a quiet, practical, hands-on devotion. When he died, he left it to Derek, not to me, to Derek. I want to be careful here because I don't think Paul meant anything complicated by it. He mentioned it once, toward the end of a longer conversation about estate logistics, and I hadn't paid close attention because I was thinking about Portugal and September and the way the light looked in the photographs he'd shown me of the Alentejo region. What he said was something like, simpler for inheritance purposes, easier transition, keeps the asset in the family. He trusted Derek completely, which I had always understood as a character reference rather than a financial strategy. And I trusted Paul, which was not naive. Paul had never once in 31 years given me a reason not to. What Paul didn't know, because Paul was dead, was that Derek had been married for 14 months to Cassandra Vane. I call her Cassie because that's what she asked me to call her in the first month when she was still performing Warmth. Cassandra Vane, age 34 at the time of the slap. Lifestyle content creator. Author of a blog called Reclaiming Your Table, which had grown from a homey cooking site to an 80,000 follower platform about healing from family wounds, setting authentic boundaries, and releasing inherited trauma patterns. She was photogenic, intelligent, and completely fluent in the dialect of contemporary therapeutic language, the vocabulary of gaslighting and narcissism, and toxic patterns that has become, in the right hands, less a framework for healing and more a remarkably effective tool for controlling the people around you. Cassie had that vocabulary the way some people have a scalpel, precisely, purposefully, and always aimed outward. She and Derek met 3 months after Paul died. They married 11 months later. I was not asked my opinion of the timeline. I told myself this was appropriate. Derek was 34, an adult, and I had spent enough years watching women devour their adult sons out of loneliness to be determined not to become one of them. I bought her a KitchenAid for the wedding. I took what I thought were very thoughtful notes on her food preferences, her allergies, her stated beliefs about family dynamics. I was trying. The early accommodations felt small. She didn't like me dropping by without calling first. Reasonable, I thought, so I started calling. She didn't enjoy certain topics at dinner. My work, mostly, and my friends from before, and the way Paul had done certain things. Also reasonable, I told myself. She hadn't known Paul, and the comparisons were perhaps uncomfortable. She preferred I not correct the grandchildren in her presence. This one I understood as a parenting philosophy difference, and filed away without comment. I was very good in those first 2 years at filing things without comment. What I was less good at noticing was the pattern. The calls I made that went unreturned for 2 or 3 days and then came back slightly cooled, slightly formal, as though I were a business contact and not the mother of the man she'd married. The way dinner invitations became less frequent and then began requiring a particular lead time and particular conditions. The grandchildren, Connor, 4, and Lily, 2, at the time of the slap, who I adored and who I was seeing less and less of. And when I asked Derek about it, he said things like, "Cassie needs advance notice," and "You know how it is with little ones," and "She's been under a lot of stress." The stress was not elaborated on. The stress, I came to understand, was me. There was an afternoon in February, about 8 months before the party, when I drove to their house to drop off a jacket Connor had left at mine. Cassie answered the door, and I could see, over her shoulder, that there were 2 women sitting at the kitchen table, friends I didn't know, mugs of coffee in front of them, and the conversation stopped when I appeared, in the way that conversations stop when the subject of the conversation has just walked in. Cassie thanked me for the jacket with a smile that did not reach past her mouth. The door closed. I sat in my car in the driveway for 4 minutes before I started the engine. I told myself I was being paranoid. I had lost Paul 17 months earlier, and grief does things to perception. Makes you see rejection in ordinary gestures, makes you audit every interaction for evidence of abandonment. I was 63 years old, and I was processing a loss, and I was probably, I told myself, looking for trouble where there wasn't any. I went home and I made dinner for 1, which had still not become an ordinary thing 3 years in. And I set one place at the table and ate something I had cooked without thinking about what it was. And I washed the plate and dried it and put it in the cabinet. And the house on Fenwick Lane had the silence it always had after dark. The silence of a house built for 2 people that now had 1, which is not the absence of sound, but a particular quality of presence that the rooms retain, a kind of waiting that has no object anymore. I went to bed at 10:30. I read 6 pages of my book and couldn't tell you what they said. Paul's workbench in the garage was exactly as he'd left it. I had a habit, when the house felt too quiet, of standing in the garage doorway and looking at it. The tools on the pegboard, the flat tools left and the round tools right. The half-empty can of wood finish he'd been using on the cabinet. His measuring tape on the corner of the bench. There was nothing useful about standing in the garage doorway looking at his things. It didn't fix anything or answer anything. I did it anyway, because it felt like a version of being in the same room with him. And sometimes that was what I had instead. I was wrong about the paranoia, but I wouldn't know it yet for another 8 months.
The party was for Connor's 5th birthday, the second Saturday in August. Cassie had planned it with the thoroughness she applied to everything. A theme involving superheroes, custom invitations, a rented bouncy castle in the backyard, a professional photographer circling the crowd. There were about 50 guests, a mix of family friends, Derek's work colleagues, and Cassie's substantial social network, some of whom I knew from her blog's comments section because she posted about family gatherings and tagged the location, and I'd long since accepted that my grandson's birthday parties were also content.
I arrived at noon, as asked, carrying Connor's gift, wearing the pale blue dress Paul had always liked. The weather was oppressively hot, and the yard smelled of sunscreen and grilling meat and the sugar-sweet chemical scent of the rented bouncy castle's vinyl. Connor saw me across the yard and came running, and I held him for a moment with my chin on top of his head and felt, as I always did around him, that physical certainty that everything I had put up with was worth it. I should have noticed then that Cassie was watching me hug him. But I was watching Connor. The party moved the way parties do. Food, games, the frosted cake shaped like a shield, Connor's face covered in blue icing. I spoke to Derek's colleague Patrick and his wife, and to my neighbor Dolores, who had also been invited, and to a woman named Heather, who turned out to be Cassie's closest friend, and who watched me with the particular alert attention of someone who has heard a great deal about you in advance. I noticed this and told myself to stop noticing things. I helped carry plates. I refilled the cooler with ice. I tried to be useful and unobtrusive simultaneously, which is a particular kind of exhausting. It was around 2:30 when the group around the picnic tables coalesced into what I can only describe as an audience. Cassie had a way of drawing people into configurations, of organizing social space without appearing to do so. One moment I was on the edge of a conversation about preschools. The next, somehow, I was standing inside a small circle of people, with Cassie directly across from me, and the photographer hovering nearby, and my son 6 feet to my left with his paper plate. She began with a compliment. She always began with a compliment. "Lorraine, I've been meaning to say, you look so much better lately. Connor talks about you constantly." She smiled at the people around us. "He adores her. She's wonderful with kids." I just wish. A pause that was precisely calibrated. I just wish it weren't so complicated. I felt the temperature shift. Not physical, it was already 90 degrees. Something more structural. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said. "Oh, I know you don't," she said. "That's part of the pattern, honestly. It's not your fault. Lorraine grew up in a generation that didn't have the tools." She was talking to the circle now, not to me. "When you haven't done the work, you can't see the impact you have on people. It doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you—" "Cassie," I said. "Someone who's done a lot of damage to this family, without being able to take responsibility for it. Derek," she looked at my son, "has spent years managing the fallout from the way he was raised. I've watched him. I've watched what it costs him. And I think it's time someone said it out loud because I'm not going to keep protecting." "Stop," I said. She stopped, but only because she had arrived at the moment she had planned. "You have been the reason this family is broken since before I even joined it," she said. "You are a toxic, controlling, emotionally abusive woman, and the only thing that has saved my children from you is that I have been a wall between you and them every single day, and I am done pretending otherwise in front of people who deserve to know the truth."
Then she slapped me. Not a shove, not a grab. The open palm, deliberate, across my left cheekbone. The crack of it was audible in the August heat. I did not fall. I am 64 years old, and I have excellent posture, and I did not fall. I took one step backward, which was involuntary, and then I stood still with my hand not quite touching my face and the warmth spreading across my cheekbone, and I looked at my son. Derek stood with his paper plate. He looked at his wife.
He looked at me. There were 3 seconds. I counted them. Standing there with my face burning, I actually counted them. And in those 3 seconds, I understood something I had perhaps known for a while but never wanted to face directly. He looked at neither of us. "Mom, can we talk about this later?" he said. Not a question, a statement, a door closing. Dolores, my neighbor, said my name from somewhere to my left. Someone else said something I couldn't hear. I was very aware of my own breathing. I picked up my handbag from the table where I'd left it. I put the strap over my shoulder. I thought about Paul. I thought about how much he had loved Connor, and how Connor would never really know it. I thought about the mug on my kitchen windowsill at home. I thought about 32 years of designing rooms for other people, of understanding space and proportion, and what it means for something to hold together. "I'll see myself out," I said. I walked through the side gate and into the front yard, and I got in my car, and I drove home to Fenwick Lane, which was technically no longer my home, though I didn't fully understand the dimensions of that problem yet. My face hurt for 3 days. The bruise faded in about 10. The counting took considerably longer. The watercolor circle met on Wednesdays in rotating houses. 4 women who had been getting together since a community arts class 9 years ago and had long since stopped pretending the point was the watercolors. There was Betty Marsh, who lived 12 minutes away and had spent 22 years as an art director at an advertising agency and swore like a sailor and was the funniest person I knew. There was Connie Park, 61, who had spent decades as a forensic accountant and who said very little, but when she spoke, it tended to land with the quiet weight of a verdict. There was Diane Russo, 68, the widow of the Honorable Martin Russo, who knew roughly everyone connected to the local court system and who made a very good baked brie. And there was Maureen Walsh, 63, a retired elementary school principal, Catholic in the bones rather than the performative sense, who never swore and whose "Lord have mercy" covered an extraordinary range of emotional terrain. It was my turn to host the following Wednesday, 6 days after the party. I had spent those 6 days doing what I always do when I don't yet know what to do. I cleaned the house. I pruned the back garden. I waxed the kitchen floor. I reorganized the pantry according to a system I then immediately found impractical and reorganized again. On the 4th day, I called the dermatologist about a mole on my wrist that had not concerned me previously, and which still did not concern me particularly, but which gave me somewhere legitimate to put my anxiety. On the 5th day, I sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning with Paul's mug and 3 hours' worth of thoughts I couldn't organize, and I wrote down in a plain notebook everything I remembered from the last 3 years. Every canceled visit, every shifted condition, every time I had driven away from their house with the particular sensation of having been reduced. Every dinner invitation that materialized and then dissolved. The pattern I had been filing away without comment. When I read it back at 4 in the morning, the mug warm in my hands, the kitchen very quiet, I felt something happen in my chest that was not grief and not anger, and was, in fact,
something considerably quieter and more dangerous than either. It was recognition. The way you recognize, in a piece of music you've heard 100 times, a structure you hadn't consciously noticed before. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. I closed the notebook. I put Paul's mug in the cabinet, gently, carefully, where it wouldn't be bumped.
I stood in the kitchen for a while. The clock over the stove said 4:17 a.m. The refrigerator hummed. A car went by on Fenwick Lane with its headlights off, which I noticed the way you notice things at 4 in the morning when the brain is still running hot and every ordinary detail feels specific. I thought about a project I had done in 2011, a complete gut renovation of a Victorian townhouse for a client who had bought it with the specific plan of making it into what she wanted, rather than what it had always been. The bones had been good. The bones were always good in those old buildings. But the previous owners had made changes over decades that seemed like improvements, and were in fact compressions, taking out load-bearing elements to open up views, filling in original details with cheaper materials, layering convenience over structure until you couldn't see what was actually holding the thing up. My job had been to strip it back, to find the original structure, understand what was carrying what, and rebuild from there. The client had been impatient. She wanted it done fast. She wanted the beautiful outcome immediately. She didn't want to hear about the sequencing. And I had had to sit her down, at a table not unlike this one, over coffee not unlike this one, and explain that there was an order to things, that you couldn't install the finishes before you'd secured the frame, that trying to skip steps in a structural renovation was how you ended up with a beautiful room that collapsed. She had listened. The house had taken 2 years. It had been extraordinary. I thought about that house at 4:17 in the morning at my kitchen table. Then I went upstairs and slept for 4 hours, which was the best sleep I'd had in weeks. Wednesday arrived with the particular warmth of mid-August, the kind that makes the air in old houses smell faintly of wood and dust and whoever used to live there. I made the lemon almond cake that was Bet's favorite. Not because I was performing normalcy, but because baking is how I think, and I had a great deal to think about. I set up the folding table in the living room with the molds and the paint trays and the paper and the wine, which had been the arrangement since the 3rd meeting 9 years ago, when we all silently acknowledged that the watercolors were a pretext and the wine was the mechanism. Bet arrived first, carrying a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, and her characteristic expression of someone who has already formed 17 opinions about the world this morning and is deciding which to deploy first. She walked in, looked at my face, the bruise was faded but not gone, and put the bottle on the table without taking off her jacket. "It's okay," she said. "Start talking. Let me wait until everyone's here. Lorraine, your face looks like someone—" She stopped, sat down, picked up the wine bottle. "Fine, but I'm opening this immediately." Connie arrived 11 minutes later with a small pot of white chrysanthemums and the expression she wore when she was already running calculations on something. Diane came in behind her, carrying the baked brie in a ceramic dish wrapped in a kitchen towel, and Maureen came last with her canvas bag of brushes and the particular air of someone at peace with herself and the universe until proven otherwise. I poured the wine. I sat down. I looked at 4 of the best women I knew, arranged around my living room with their glasses and their brushes and their willingness to be here on a Wednesday afternoon, and I felt something very close to gratitude, sharp enough to almost be painful. I told them everything. I told them about the party, about the circle that had formed, about the things Cassie had said. I told them about the slap. I told them about Derek and his paper plate,
and his 3 seconds of silence.
I told them about the pattern I had assembled in the notebook at 2 in the morning. I talked for a long time. The wine went down. Nobody touched the watercolors. When I finished, there was a silence. Maureen set down her glass with a soft click. "Lord have mercy," she said. "She hit you," Connie said. "In front of 50 people." "Yes." "Including your son, who did nothing." "Yes." Betty had been quiet for the last 4 minutes, which, for Betty, was extraordinary. She was looking at the table, doing something internal. Then she looked up. "I've been watching this for 1.5 years," she said. "And I want to say, because it needs to be said, I should have said something sooner. But you kept filing it away, and I kept thinking you knew what you were doing, and apparently I was wrong. And I'm sorry. You weren't wrong about me knowing what I was doing. I just didn't know yet what to do with what I knew." "Okay, well, what do we do now?" "I need a lawyer," I said. "I know 4, Diane said. She said it the way you'd say, 'I have eggs,' or 'I have gas in the car,' a practical resource, readily available." "Of course you do," Betty said. "Martin was a district judge for 18 years. You collect lawyers. Lorraine, do you want someone who does family and estate, or do you want someone who can do both plus a civil action?" "I want someone who can do everything, all of it, at once." "Franklin Greer. He was Martin's squash partner for 12 years. He does estate litigation, he does civil, and he is," she considered, "extremely thorough. I'll call him in the morning." Connie had been looking at her wine glass. She set it down. "I want to say something about the financial piece." Everyone looked at her. "You said Derek had access to the joint account, the inheritance account. You said money has been coming out and you hadn't been paying close attention." "I assumed it was—" "I know what you assumed. What I'm saying is, you need to pull those statements before you do anything else. All of them. Back 3 years if you can get them. Don't say anything to Derek or Cassie until you have them in your hand. And then—" She picked up her glass again. "You bring them to Franklin Greer." "How bad do you think it is?" Connie looked at me with the specific expression she wore when she had already done the math and was deciding how much of it to share. "I think you should pull the statements." Betty had picked up a brush, not to paint, just to hold, which was a habit of hers when she was working through something. "You know what I've been thinking about?" she said. "She has a blog with 80,000 followers about healing from toxic family members." A pause. "She's been documenting herself for 18 months, in public, in detail." A silence. "Exhibits A through Z," Maureen said quietly. "Every post, every story, every little caption about her journey and her truth and what she's finally done protecting herself from." Betty set the brush down. "She handed you the entire case, out loud, with photographs." I looked at Betty, then at Connie, who was nodding slowly, then at Diane, who was already reaching for her phone. "I'm going to need to screenshot everything," I said. "I've already started," Diane said. We didn't make any plans that night. Or rather, we talked about several plans, most of which were not the actual plan, and the actual plan we discussed only in outline, and the parts that mattered most we didn't say aloud at all. There was a brief and enjoyable digression in which Betty proposed something involving Cassie's blog comment section that we all agreed was creative and that none of us were actually going to do. Maureen suggested writing a letter to Derek, which I thought about for a long moment, and then Connie said, quietly, without emphasis, "Not yet," and Maureen nodded and let it go.
We painted for about 40 minutes, badly and happily. Connie produced something that looked like a very angry sea. Diane made what she described as a landscape and what appeared to be a gray oval. Betty painted a small, impeccable bird that made the rest of us feel inadequate. I started something abstract and blue and found, somewhere in the middle of it, that my hands had stopped shaking. They didn't leave until after 10. Betty was last. She stood in the doorway with her jacket half on, the night warm and cricket loud around her. "You're not the problem," she said. "I need you to know that I know that, and that I should have said it more clearly, more often, before tonight." I thought about saying something adequate in return, and found I didn't have the words. "Thank you for the wine," I said instead. She gave me a look that communicated quite a lot without requiring any of it to be said aloud, and left. Franklin Greer's office was on the 3rd floor of a building downtown that smelled of carpet and old paper and the particular quiet of rooms where serious things are decided. Franklin himself was 70, white-haired, dry-voiced, with the kind of stillness that comes from having spent decades in rooms where people were frightened.
He had known Paul peripherally through various contractor work, through Diane's connections, through the small overlapping circles of a mid-sized city where everyone eventually knew everyone's name, if not their whole story. Diane had called him, he had called me. The appointment was for Thursday morning, 9 days after the party. I brought the notebook. I brought the bank statements, 3 years' worth, printed at the branch on Tuesday morning with the specific cooperation of a young manager named Torres, who was patient with me, and who I tipped $5 in cash, which he tried to refuse, and which I insisted on because Paul had always said you tip people who help you, and I wasn't ready to stop doing the things Paul had always said. I brought a printed copy of the last 6 months of Cassie's blog, which was 214 pages in 11-point type, and which I had read with a yellow highlighter and the focused attention I used to give to building codes. I also brought the letter. The letter had arrived certified mail 11 days before the party, so 2 days before the slap, which I had not connected until 3 in the morning in my kitchen. It was from a real estate attorney. It was brief, formal, and it informed me that Derek Holt, as registered owner of the property at 1142 Fenwick Lane, was in the process of exploring a change of use for the property, and that as a current occupant, I should be aware that a formal assessment would be required within 60 days, and that I should consult counsel regarding my residential status. My residential status. I had read it twice the morning it arrived, and then put it in a kitchen drawer under the takeout menus, because I had a party to attend, and I didn't yet know what it meant, and I realize now, not ready to know. It had been easier in that moment to put it away and go to the party in Paul's favorite dress, and hope that the letter had some innocent explanation I simply hadn't thought of. There were moments, in the weeks between the letter and the meeting with Franklin, where I tried to construct that innocent explanation. Perhaps it was about zoning. Perhaps Derek was exploring a refinancing. Perhaps the attorney had been given outdated information, and the whole thing was a misunderstanding that would resolve itself with a single phone call. I didn't make the phone call, because I think I already knew. I knew now. Franklin read the letter first, then the bank statements. Then he read 12 pages of the blog printout with the attention of someone who is reading a legal document, because in his hands, that was what it was. He didn't speak for quite a long time. His office had a window overlooking a parking structure, which was not a beautiful view, but the light was good. "Tell me about the account, how it was structured." Paul and I set it up after he died. His life insurance, some investment accounts, the cash from a property sale we did years ago. About $240,000 to start. Derek was added because Paul wanted... I stopped, reorganized.
Paul wanted it simple, for transition purposes, for after I was gone. Derek had full access. So did I. And the withdrawals. $68,000 over 26 months. I went back as far as the statements would go. Regular transfers, 2,000 or 3,000 at a time. The amounts match almost exactly the budget figures Cassie posted for her blog's production costs. The studio rental, the equipment, the photography, the courses she enrolled in. Franklin tapped the edge of the statement. She was financing a business venture from an account that existed to ensure your financial security. Yes, and your son facilitated this. A pause. The parking structure was very quiet below us.
My son did not tell me this was happening. Franklin nodded once, which was not agreement or sympathy, but simple acknowledgement. The professional kind that didn't cost him anything and didn't promise anything. On the assault, the slap, you have how many witnesses? Roughly 50, including my neighbor Dolores, who called me the following Monday and asked what she should do, and I told her to write down what she remembered and sign it. She did. I have that here. I took out the envelope. I also have 3 text messages from people who were at the party and reached out afterward. He opened the envelope and read Dolores's account. He read it again. She writes clearly. This is useful. He set it aside. The blog. I highlighted the relevant posts, particularly the ones from the 18 months prior to the party where she describes in detail the dynamics with her mother-in-law. She never uses my name, but the details are identifying. She describes, I found the page, quote, an older woman who can't accept that her son has grown up and moved on, who interferes with her grandchildren in ways that bypass boundaries, who is resistant to growth and stuck in inherited patterns of control. I put the paper down. 50 witnesses saw her strike the woman she's been describing in those terms to 80,000 people for a year and a half. Franklin looked at me over the top of his glasses. She built a public record of her grievances against you, documented in real time, with dates and post-metadata. And a photographer at the party who I believe captured the moment. You believe? I've been in contact with him. He's a freelancer. He had the whole thing on his camera card. He's willing to provide copies. Franklin was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Holt, have you done this before? Designed interiors for 32 years. I understand how to read a space. You have to see the structure before you can work with it. He picked up his pen. We have 3 matters. The civil action for assault and battery, which is straightforward given the witness evidence. The financial matter, which will require an accounting and potentially a fraud or breach of fiduciary claim against your son. And the residential matter, which is the most urgent because of the 60-day window. He wrote something. The residential matter is a problem. The house is legally his. We can challenge the intent of the original transfer. Paul's documentation suggests it was understood as a custodial arrangement rather than an outright gift. But that's a contested position, not a certainty. I'm not asking you to get me the house, Franklin. He looked up. I'm asking you to get me 60 days to move out with my dignity intact, and a clear accounting of what's been taken from that account, and a formal record of what happened at that party. That's what I need. He put the pen down. Those are achievable. I drove home along Fenwick Lane and pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a moment looking at the house. Paul's house. The front porch he'd rebuilt in 2009 when the boards started going soft. The beds along the foundation that I'd replanted twice. The garage where his workbench still sat with its tools hung on pegboard in the specific order he'd devised. Flat tools left,
round tools, right? Everything within arm's reach of the bench. I had not changed that order. I kept telling myself I would deal with his tools eventually, and I never had, and I was beginning to think I never would, that I would simply sell the house with his tools on the pegboard and let whatever came next figure out what to do with them. I sat in the car for 6 minutes.
Not because I needed to, particularly. Because I was doing the thing I had always done in the driveway of this house. Arriving at the beginning of something, or the end of something, and taking a moment to mark the transition before I went in. Paul had teased me about it. He'd said I had a ritual for every threshold, which was true, and which was perhaps a professional hazard after 32 years of thinking about what doorways mean. This one meant something. I wanted to note it properly. I had arrived at this house 30 years ago as a woman who was building something. I was leaving it as a woman who had finished something. The difference was not small. I went inside. I picked up Paul's mug from the cabinet, filled it from the kettle, and sat down at the kitchen table with my notebook and began to make a list. Not a list of grievances, a list of tasks. What needed to be done, in what order, by when. I had been a professional for 32 years. I knew how to make a plan. I knew how to read a structure, how to find the load-bearing elements and the decorative ones, how to understand what could be moved without consequence and what would take the whole thing down if disturbed. What Cassie Vane had built, her blog, her brand, her $75,000 renovation financed with my money, her performance of healing and boundaries and truth-telling, was beautiful from the outside. It had warmth and light and the air of authenticity. But it was built on a single load-bearing lie, that she was the one being harmed. Remove that, and everything else came down. I finished my tea. I started making calls. The following morning, I called the bank. I asked them to move my personal accounts, the ones Cassie didn't know about, the ones from my years of client fees, the ones Paul had called my independent money, in the approving tone of a man who believed in redundant systems, to a different institution. I did this before I did anything else. I did not tell Derek. I spoke to the manager, a woman named Gloria, who I had worked with for 6 years, who processed the transfers with the professional efficiency of someone who has learned not to ask questions that aren't her job. "Is there anything else I can help you with today, Mrs. Holt?" "That covers it. Thank you, Gloria." Then I called Dolores. Dolores Vargas had lived across the street from us since 1998. She was 67, Filipino-American, a retired pediatric nurse with a laugh like a car alarm and a memory for detail that had always made her invaluable as a neighbor and an eyewitness. She had written her statement with the clarity of someone accustomed to medical documentation. When I called her, she picked up before the second ring. "Lorraine, I've been thinking about you. How are you, sweetheart?" "I'm fine. I'm moving. I need a realtor." A short silence. "Moving. I'm going to find a smaller place, something mine. Do you still know the woman from your church who does residential sales?" "Patricia Chun. Yes, she's excellent. She did the Nakamura's house on Birch last spring. Very fast, very clean. Can you get me her number?" "Lorraine, are you okay?" I thought about this for a moment. I'm going to be. Patricia Chun found me a house in 11 days. It was 4 miles from Fenwick, on a quiet street with older maples and good bones. A 1970s ranch, smaller than I was used to, with a kitchen that faced east so the morning light came in across the counter, and a room off the back that had been a sunroom and that I immediately saw as a studio if I ever wanted one, which I thought I might. It needed work. The bones were good, but the surfaces were tired, which was something I knew how to address. I made an offer on a Thursday. It was accepted on a Friday. I did not tell Derek I was buying a house. I told Betty, "You're just doing it, she said, on the phone, in the tone of someone watching a chess player make a move they should have seen coming and somehow didn't.
You're just buying a house.
I've bought houses before.
Lorraine, you're something else. Have I told you that recently?
Not since last Wednesday.
You're something else.
I told Connie, too, because Connie needed to know for the financial sequencing. The money I was using was clean. It was mine. It had nothing to do with the joint account. But Connie was tracking every thread of the financial picture, and she needed this piece. She listened, asked 3 precise questions, wrote something down.
Good, she said. That was all.
Meanwhile, Franklin was working. He sent a certified letter to Derek's real estate attorney informing them that the current occupant of 1142 Fenwick Lane was contesting the 60-day timeline on the basis of a potential legal challenge to the original transfer instrument, and that Mrs. Holt would be requiring no fewer than 90 days and the involvement of a mediator. The real estate attorney responded. Franklin responded to the response. This is how these things work. Slowly, expensively, in writing, which suits the kind of people who have the patience to do them and disadvantages the kind of people who need things to happen quickly. Cassie, I was beginning to understand, needed things to happen quickly. The blog lived in the present tense. The brand required motion, momentum, the constant small victories of the narrative. A protracted legal correspondence was not a content opportunity. A methodical 64-year-old woman who was not responding the way she was supposed to respond was not a useful story. The moment I understood this, I understood how to proceed. The civil suit for assault and battery was filed 3 weeks after the party.
Franklin drafted it with the precision I had expected from a man who had been doing this for 40 years. It named Cassandra Vane as defendant, cited the assault of August 12th, documented the witnesses, including Dolores's signed statement and the 3 texts, and attached, in Exhibit D, a selection of blog posts in which the defendant had publicly characterized the plaintiff in terms that established a documented pattern of hostility preceding the physical act. The photographer's images were Exhibit E. The photograph was clear. The angle was good, slightly to the side, which meant both our faces were in the frame. Mine showing the beginning of shock, Cassie's showing something I can only describe as completion. The expression of someone who has arrived at a destination they have been traveling toward for a long time. I've thought about that photograph many times since. It tells a very simple story, and it tells it without any words at all. Derek called me the night the suit was filed. I had been expecting the call, and I had prepared for it, which meant I sat with Paul's mug at the kitchen table, and I breathed for a few minutes before I picked up. "Mom, what are you? You're suing Cassie." "Cassie hit me in front of 50 people, Derek, including you." "Mom, I have a photograph." Silence. I know it was wrong. She knows it was wrong. He stopped. She's been going through something. She's been in a difficult place, and she's been working through some things, and it wasn't okay, but she didn't mean. Stop. He stopped. I want to talk to you about something else. I want to talk about the account. What account? The inheritance account. The one your father set up for me. The one you have access to. The silence was longer this time.
Lorraine, I was going to... Don't call me Lorraine. I'm your mother. Mom, I was going to talk to you about that. I was planning to. $68,000, Derek. 26 months. The amounts are documented. They correspond almost exactly to the line items in Cassie's blog budget posts, which she made public.
Silence. I thought. What did you think? I thought we'd figure it out. I thought it would be fine. I thought. His voice broke slightly. I didn't know how to tell you. You could have told me. She didn't want me to. I let that sit. The kitchen was quiet. Paul's mug was warm. Your father built this house with his hands, I said. He worked every weekend for 6 months. He put that money aside over 30 years so that I would be safe. And you gave it to someone who chose to hurt me with it. Not because you needed it, because you couldn't say no. Mom, I'm not angry at you, Derek. I want you to understand that. I'm grieving you a little. But I'm not angry. What are you going to do? What I should have done a while ago. I'm getting my own house. I'm filing the civil action. And I'm separating what remains of that account. Franklin Greer called our attorney. Yes. Mom, there's a process. There is, yes. I'll let the process work. He was silent for a long moment. I miss Dad, he said. Something in my chest moved, hard and sideways. I miss him too, I said. That's not the same as this being okay. I let him go after that. I sat with the mug for another 20 minutes in the kitchen quiet, and I thought about Paul, who had trusted so simply and so well, and who had not been wrong to trust, only unlucky in the timing of his dying, which had left a gap where his judgment had been. I thought about the house on Fenwick Lane and what it meant that I was leaving it. I thought about the new house with the east-facing kitchen. I thought about the room off the back and what color I might paint it, and whether I'd been honest with myself about the watercolors. I decided I would paint it blue, the color of something that had just been cleaned. The civil suit moved through the calendar. Cassie's attorney, a young woman from a downtown firm, filed a response. The response was, to put it plainly, a mistake. It asserted that the plaintiff had been the source of ongoing emotional harm to the defendant and her family, and that the physical contact on August 12th was the result of extreme emotional provocation. It essentially restated the blog. It provided informal legal language, the exact narrative that Franklin had been waiting for, because the moment you assert emotional provocation as a defense, you open the door to the full history of the relationship, which means the financial records, which means the $68,000. Franklin called me after he read the response. She filed a defense that invites discovery. I see. Her attorney may not have seen all of the financial documentation, or she may have, and assessed the reputational risk of the assault evidence as greater than the financial exposure. In either case, a pause. We're going to have a very productive deposition. When? 6 weeks. Enough time to prepare properly. Another pause, and I could hear him turning a page. I've also been looking at the blog, post by post. And? Mrs. Holt, did you know she has a post from March of last year titled, "When your partner's mother moves into a home you didn't ask for"? I wasn't aware. In it, she writes that she had been considering options for ensuring her family's safety for approximately 18 months at the time of writing. She uses the phrase, "protecting the space." She describes the house. The address is not given, but the description is detailed and identifying, as finally becoming what it was supposed to be. I held the phone very still. That post was 9 months before the party. Yes, which makes it a documented statement of premeditation, published publicly, with her name attached. A pause.
She has also, since the suit was filed, made 3 posts about the legal process and navigating family conflict with integrity. They are, to put it charitably, not helpful to her case.
She can't stop posting.
The brand requires motion. She needs to be perceived as the one navigating, the one surviving. A pause. She is currently producing her own deposition exhibits.
I thought about this. Franklin,
Yes,
she's going to keep posting through the whole thing, isn't she?
almost certainly.
Good. The deposition was held in Franklin's office on a Tuesday in October. I wore the gray wool dress I'd bought in 2019 for a client presentation. The one Paul had said made me look like someone who knew exactly what she was doing, which was the highest compliment in his vocabulary. I arrived 20 minutes early. I drank 1 cup of coffee, which was enough, and left the second half. Cassie arrived in a cream blazer with her hair blown out and an expression of composed injury that she'd clearly rehearsed. Her attorney was young and sharp and had, I suspected, been working very hard in the preceding weeks to understand exactly how much trouble the blog had created.
The expression she wore was the particular expression of a lawyer who has recently discovered that their client is not entirely as they presented themselves. The deposition ran 4 hours. Franklin asked about August 12th. He asked about the party, the circle, the slap. He asked Cassie to characterize her relationship with me. She spoke fluently, at length, in the vocabulary of the blog. She talked about patterns and impacts and the weight of inherited dysfunction and the years of emotional labor she had expended on the relationship. She spoke for 27 minutes on the topic of her own suffering. Then Franklin asked about the account. The shift was very small. A slight adjustment in Cassie's posture, a fractional pause before the answer. But I had been watching her for 3 years, and I knew what it meant. The household finances were Derek's responsibility, she said. But you were aware of the account. I knew Derek had access to an account. Did you know it was his mother's inheritance account, specifically set aside for her security after the death of his father? A pause. Derek handled the finances. I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit C, which is a post from your blog dated January of last year, in which you write, and I'll read it precisely, "We've been building toward this for 2 years. The studio is almost ready. The equipment alone was worth the investment. Some things cost money. Some things cost more. But when you're building something real, you find a way to make it work." Franklin looked up. What investment were you referring to? Cassie looked at her attorney. Her attorney looked at the table. Content creation requires significant upfront. I'm asking about the specific investment referenced in this post, dated to a period in which $68,000 was withdrawn from an account belonging to the plaintiff. Can you tell me what funded the studio equipment referenced in this post?
The answer Cassie gave was long and careful and said very little, which Franklin received with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world. The deposition of Derek followed. I was not present for it. Franklin had advised against it, and I had agreed because I was not sure I could sit in a room and watch my son perform helplessness and maintain the clarity I needed. Connie, who had become a sort of parallel strategic coordinator at this point, reported back that it had been illuminating and not comfortable for anyone, and left it at that. The financial mediation began in November. This was separate from the civil suit, a separate track involving a mediator and the specific question of the account. The mediator was a compact, efficient woman named Cheryl Davis, who did not appear to have any opinion about anyone in the room, and who moved through the documentation with the speed of someone who had processed a great many situations exactly like this one, and had long since stopped being surprised by any of them.
The figure that emerged after 3 sessions was not $68,000. It was $82,000, after interest calculations and documented related expenditures that Connie identified in the account records. There was a settlement discussion. There were several days of back and forth. There was a moment during the 3rd session when Cassie's attorney leaned over and said something to Cassie in a voice too low to hear, and Cassie's composed expression did something it had never done in any of the times I had been in a room with her. It broke. Not into anger, into something smaller.
She looked, for about 4 seconds, like someone who had been so focused on the performance of a story that they hadn't noticed when the story stopped being under their control. I did not feel triumphant watching this. I felt tired. I felt the particular tiredness of someone who has been in a fight they never wanted to be in, and who is still in it, but can finally see, if not the end, at least the direction. The settlement in the civil suit was reached in December. I will not give the figure. I will say it was sufficient, and that it was not contingent on any admission, and that it included a formal commitment by both defendants to remove or amend the blog posts that the suit had catalogued as defamatory. This last part was Cassie's, to put it plainly, catastrophe. The brand could survive a lot of things. It could not survive a legal order to unpublish the narrative that had built the brand. By the time I moved out of Fenwick Lane in late November, I had already spent 3 weekends at the new house on Maple Court with a set of swatches and a tape measure, and the very specific pleasure of a professional confronting a space that has potential. The east-facing kitchen was everything the photographs had suggested. The room off the back was going to be my studio. I had decided on the blue, a warm, clear, particular blue, not quite cerulean, not quite slate, the color of early morning in late October when the light is still finding itself, the color of something new. I painted it myself, which I had not done since Paul and I painted the Fenwick Lane kitchen together in 1997, and argued companionably about coverage while listening to a basketball game on the radio. I rented a ladder. I took my time. I did 2 coats. When I finished and stood in the doorway with the light coming through the west window and hitting the fresh paint, I thought of Paul, the way I still thought of him most days, not with the sharp chest pain of early grief, but with the softer ache of a presence that had become part of you and does not stop being present simply because it is no longer physical. "Pretty good coverage," I said. I moved in on the first Friday of December with a rented truck and Bet and Dolores and Bet's college-age nephew, Marcus, who could lift things and who accepted instructions from 3 women over 60 with a grace that spoke well of how he'd been raised. I brought the furniture I wanted, the art I wanted, the garden tools, the kitchen things I'd chosen, the contents of my studio files. I did not bring the dining set. That was Paul's mother's, and Derek could have it, I decided. It had been intended for the house, and the house was his. I bought a new table, smaller, with clean lines, from a local maker who had taken my design requirements seriously and delivered something that fit the East kitchen perfectly. I brought Paul's mug. I packed it in bubble wrap and put it in the center of a box, and labeled the box, Kitchen First. And when Marcus carried it in, I followed him to the kitchen, and I took it out before anything else, and I set it on the windowsill where the morning light would reach it. The move was complete by 4. Bet opened champagne, which I had not asked her to bring, and which I was extremely glad she had. We sat on the front porch steps in the December cold, with our glasses and Dolores's contributed blanket, and Marcus's borrowed space heater, and we drank the champagne and watched the street getting dark. Connie had come by to see the place. Maureen brought food, which she always did, and which was always exactly right. Diane sent flowers, lilies and eucalyptus, with a card that said simply, "The hard part is done."
You need curtains.
Beth said, looking at the windows.
I know. And a real porch chair, not this.
She gestured at the step.
I know. I have an opinion about the entryway. Of course you do. Are you going to listen to it? I'll think about it.
She made a sound that indicated this was what she expected and that she was already prepared to be patient about it. Dolores poured the last of the champagne into my glass, since she was the nearest.
You look different, she said, than you did in August.
I thought about this.
I feel different. Good.
She looked at the house.
It's a good house.
It is. The blog went quiet in January. Not the whole blog. She still posted, still maintained the rhythm of the platform. But the family content, the healing narrative, the posts about the journey and releasing what no longer serves you, those dwindled, then stopped. The posts about boundaries and toxic patterns were removed in compliance with the settlement terms. The studio that had been built with my money was photographed extensively, tagged with affiliate links, and incorporated into content about investing in your creative space, with no reference to the source of the investment. The comment section, which had previously been full of supportive messages about her mother-in-law situation, was now full of messages about her kitchen backsplash. I checked the blog once, in February, and then didn't again. In March, Connie emailed me a link to a brief item in a local business newsletter, noting that a content creator operating under the Reclaiming Your Table brand had suspended her small business LLC and was in the process of restructuring. The link included a photograph of Cassie at a coffee shop, looking very put together, as she always did. I read the item once. I didn't click through. Derek called me in late January, 4 weeks after the settlement closed. I had been expecting the call and dreading it, and also, in a complicated way, needing it. I answered on the second ring. Mom,
Derek,
I need to say something.
Okay. I should have said something at the party. A pause. I know that. I've known it since... I knew it the second you walked through that gate. I watched you walk out, and I didn't say anything, and His voice was unsteady. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the account. I'm sorry for the party. I'm sorry for... He stopped. I'm sorry for a lot of things. I let the apology sit. I thought about what Paul would have said, which was always my first reference point in complicated situations. Paul, who built things that lasted and repaired what broke and threw nothing fixable away. I believe you, I said, that you're sorry. Is there a way to... I don't know yet. I think that's honest. I need time, Derek, not as punishment, just because I need it. Okay. Connor and Lily. I'd like to see them, if that's something you can arrange. Yes, absolutely. They ask about you. I let the warmth of that land before I answered. I'd like that. We talked for another 10 minutes, carefully, the way you talk when the ground is still uncertain and you're both testing whether it holds. When we hung up, I sat with Paul's mug for a long time, the morning light moving across the windowsill, and I thought about fixable things. Not everything was fixable, I knew that. 26 months and $68,000 and a slap in front of 50 people and a son who stood with his paper plate and looked at neither of us. These things leave a mark. Not the bruise kind, which fades.
The other kind, the architectural kind, which changes the load-bearing calculations permanently. You build around it. You work with the new structure. But some things were still there. Connor asking about me. Derek's voice breaking. The fact that he called. These were also things that were real. The watercolor circle met at Betty's house in April, the first meeting in the new configuration. Betty had acquired, for reasons she declined to explain, a very large and very bad reproduction of a Monet water lily painting, which she had hung above the mantelpiece expressly to paint against, as she put it. The original paintings, she argued, were about the dissolution of form into light, and her version was going to be about the survival of form despite the insistence of light, which Connie pointed out was not how painting worked, and Betty said she was aware of that. It was a metaphor. Keep up. I was working on a small piece, not the abstract blue I'd been doing since the fall, but something more specific, something I'd been thinking about for a while. The kitchen windowsill. Paul's mug on it. The morning light. I wasn't sure it was good. I was fairly sure it didn't matter whether it was good, which felt like a development.
Lorraine has been quiet,
Maureen said, in the tone she used when quiet was a condition requiring gentle inquiry.
I'm painting.
You're actually painting, Betty said.
Look at that. An artist.
Don't exaggerate.
She's actually painting, Betty said to the room, as though reporting a meteorological event.
Lord have mercy, said Maureen. I kept painting. The light on the mug, the crack along the handle, the way it had been repaired, which, if you knew to look for it, made it stronger where it had broken. The window behind it, the April maple outside, the ordinary, irreplaceable fact of a Wednesday morning in my own kitchen, in my own house. He said it held heat better than the new ones. He said throwing out a fixable thing was a character flaw. I finished the painting in early May, and I hung it in the blue studio where the west light fell on it in the late afternoon. I didn't show it to anyone. It was mine. Outside, the maple was in full leaf. The coffee that morning was not bitter at all.